always thought I had a perfect marriage. My husband is amazing, always taking care of the family, helping with the housework, and we have a peaceful home. But one day, when I borrowed his phone, I discovered an unbelievable secret. Romantic messages with another woman, words of love, and promises. Should I face the truth or stay silent, preserving the perfect family life I've always dreamed of? I've always been proud of my marriage. My husband, Mark, is an amazing man. He's not only a loving husband but also a wonderful father to our son. Mark always helps with the housework, from cooking to laundry to picking up our son from school. He's always focused on making sure our family is comfortable, and I feel incredibly lucky to have him in my life. We've been married for 15 years, and although we've had our ups and downs, overall, our life together has been stable and happy. Mark is very thoughtful, and he knows how to maintain our relationship, always making me feel special. We're not a perfect family, but in my eyes, he's the best man. One evening, I happened to borrow his phone while he was in the shower. At first, I only intended to check something related to my work, but then I realized his phone wasn't locked. I knew I shouldn't be snooping, but something urged me to unlock it and take a quick look. I didn't expect to find anything surprising, as Mark has always been honest, and I've never had any reason to doubt him. When I opened his messaging app, I saw a long thread of messages. At first, I thought they might be work-related texts or chats with friends, but as I read more carefully, an unsettling feeling began to rise inside me. These weren't just ordinary messages exchanged between spouses. They were sweet words of affection, things I had never heard Mark say to me before. His messages were with another woman. They spoke in ways I never imagined I'd see in our marriage. Words of love, promises to meet over the weekend, and discussions about previous meetings, details that shocked me. Especially when they said, "I love you, and I love you too," it felt like a punch in the gut. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I went over the messages again, hoping I had misunderstood, but everything was clear. This wasn't a joke, nor was it a typing mistake. My husband was in love with another woman. A wave of anger, disbelief, and pain washed over me. How could this happen? Mark wasn't the type of man to do this. We'd built a stable family, we had a 9-year-old son, and I always believed we were leading a happy life. But now, everything seemed dark and confusing. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything, the confusion, the not knowing what to do or say. I couldn't face Mark in that moment. I didn't know how to approach him or what to say. Questions kept swirling in my head. Does he really love this other woman? What will he do next? Should I confront him about this? The pain and emptiness grew every time I thought about it. But I hadn't decided what to do yet. Maybe I was afraid to face the truth. Or perhaps I was scared that if I did anything, our family life would be shattered. What mattered more? Facing the truth? Or preserving what we had? That question kept repeating in my mind, and I couldn't find an answer. The entire night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The turmoil inside me was overwhelming, and I couldn't figure out how to face this truth. I knew I had to do something, but I just couldn't imagine where to begin. How could I confront Mark? He had always been the one person I trusted most in my life. He's my husband, the father of our son, but now, he had betrayed me in a way I never could have imagined. The following morning, I tried to focus on work and take care of our son, but my mind kept drifting back to those messages. They replayed over and over in my head like a never-ending nightmare. The sweet words, the promises he made to her, echoed in my thoughts. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Every time Mark picked up his phone, I couldn't help but stare at the screen. Whenever he was late coming home, a sense of unease would creep in. I couldn't help but wonder if that woman was waiting for him somewhere. Did he really love her like he said? The questions that had no answers kept eating away at me. I couldn't go on living like this, but I didn't know what to do. Sometimes I told myself maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe it was just some meaningless messages, just a casual exchange. But deep down I knew that wasn't the truth. Mark had said, "I love you" to that woman. How could that be meaningless? One evening, when Mark was late coming home from work, I decided to take things a step further. I took his phone again. This time, I didn't just read the messages, I searched for any evidence of their meetings. And I wasn't disappointed. On a photo sharing app, I found pictures that Mark had sent to this woman. Intimate pictures, ones that could only be sent in a romantic relationship. My heart stopped when I saw them. The fear, the emptiness, and the pain rushed back. I started wondering if I was really living in a genuine relationship, or if I had been living in a shell of something I had created for myself. The question, "Does he still love me?" kept spinning in my mind, and I couldn't answer it. I wanted to confront him, face the truth, but I was scared that if I did, I would shatter everything. Would I have the strength to confront him and start over if the truth meant I couldn't continue living with him? That question haunted me, and I still couldn't find an answer. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. The unease inside me kept growing, making it impossible to act as I used to. Everything felt different. I looked at Mark with suspicion every time he picked up his phone or when he was late coming home in the evenings. Every time he said, "You go ahead and sleep, I have some work to finish," or "I'm going out to meet a friend, I'll be home late," I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming fear. I kept wondering if he was meeting that woman. That feeling of unease intensified each day. Every time he hugged me or spoke those familiar words of affection, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had discovered. Did he truly love me? Could those loving words still be real? Or was it all just a show to cover up the betrayal that I hadn't seen? I started questioning whether I had the strength to face the truth. Every time I thought about speaking up, it felt like a storm I wouldn't be able to weather. I was scared. Scared that if I confronted him, everything would come crashing down. What would happen if he denied everything? If he told me I was just a jealous wife? Or worse, what if he confessed and told me he couldn't stay with me anymore? Then one day, when Mark was late again, I decided to do what I had been avoiding for so long. I had to ask him. I couldn't live in this doubt any longer. Our son was already asleep, and in the quiet of our home, I felt like everything was set for this confrontation. He came home around 9 p.m., and I was sitting silently in the living room. I had no idea where to begin. The first question that came to my mind was, "Do you still love me?" But I felt that wasn't the question I needed to ask. I had to say what I knew, what I had discovered, but I was terrified that he would react in a way I couldn't predict. When he walked into the room, I looked into his eyes and felt something different. His gaze was no longer the gentle, loving one I was used to. It was cold, guarded, as if he knew exactly what I was about to say. I spoke. "Mark, there's something I need to tell you. I know everything." He remained silent, not responding immediately. The room seemed to freeze, and I could hear the thumping of my own heart. I looked into his eyes, waiting for his reaction. "I know what you've been doing," I continued, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside I was falling apart. "I know about the messages, the pictures. I know everything." Mark stayed silent. In that moment, I couldn't tell what he would say. Would he admit it, or would he try to deny it? Or would he say that it was all a misunderstanding, just an innocent mistake? I stood there, my heart racing, my hands cold with fear. I was ready to face whatever came next, but the fear still gripped me. Mark stood there, looking at me, silent. Not a word was spoken, only the tension filling the room. I could feel him trying to think, as if he knew I had discovered everything and there was no denying it anymore. Time seemed to stop, and all I could hear were the questions in my mind spinning uncontrollably. Would he admit everything, or would he try to deny it and cover up the truth? Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Mark spoke, but his voice was no longer as confident as it usually was. I don't know what to say." He paused, then continued, "It's not what you think." His words woke me from the nightmare I had been living. Why wasn't it what I thought? All the messages, the pictures, the loving words. Could he really say that it wasn't the truth? I stared at him, unable to believe that he could deny what had already happened. "I've seen everything, Mark." I tried to keep my voice calm, even though inside I was seething. "You can't say this is just a misunderstanding anymore. You love her, don't you?" He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I was wrong," he finally admitted, his voice trembling. "I don't know what to do. The feelings I have for her are different, you can't understand." He stopped for a moment, and I saw panic in his eyes. I didn't want to hurt you, but I've already gone too far. Each word he said felt like a knife cutting through my heart. I had imagined many ways he might react, but I never expected him to admit the truth so painfully. I felt like everything I had believed in, everything we had built, was collapsing piece by piece. Who is she? Why did you do this? I couldn't hold back any longer. My voice was a mix of questioning and accusation, filled with hurt. Mark bowed his head, unwilling to look at me. She's someone I met on a business trip. It started with simple conversations, but then, I can't explain it. I just wanted a break, someone to talk to about things I couldn't share with you. I felt like the entire world was crumbling around me. I couldn't understand his words. We had lived together, raised a family together, and yet he felt the need to find another woman to talk to. All the things he was saying sounded like excuses. None of them could justify his actions. Did you think I would forgive you? I asked, my voice choking in my throat. Mark remained silent, not answering. The room was still. I stared into his eyes, and I realized I no longer knew what to do. Everything I had wanted, everything I had believed in, now felt blurry and distant. Was it possible to go back? Could we start over, or was it already too late? I felt like I was standing on the edge of something monumental, something I couldn't turn back from. Every decision now felt too important, and I didn't know if I had the strength to face this truth. Time seemed to stand still as Mark remained silent, not responding. Everything felt blurred, and I felt like I was surrounded by a fog, unable to see clearly what would happen next. Every word he spoke, every glance he gave me, felt like daggers piercing my heart. But I couldn't turn back. I had to decide. Do you still love me? I asked, even though I knew that this question was more for me to find my own answer. It was a question I had been avoiding because I didn't want to face the painful truth. But now, I needed to know. I needed to know if I was still important in his life or if I was just a part of the past. Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with worry, but it seemed like he couldn't find the words to answer. He turned away, unable to face me. A thick silence enveloped the room, and the only sound was our breathing, like a sad melody playing between us. I can't keep living like this, I continued, my voice softer now but filled with resolve. I can't pretend everything is fine. You can't live in two worlds, you have to choose. I stood up, walking over to the window and looking out, letting the coldness settle inside me. Deep down, I felt a pain that couldn't be erased. Right now, I just wanted to run away from it all, from this life, from the truth I didn't want to face. But I couldn't. I had a family, I had our son, and I couldn't let everything fall apart because of a mistake. Mark didn't speak. He just stood there, silent. I couldn't read anything in his eyes, couldn't understand what he was thinking or feeling. I felt like a stranger in my own home. He was no longer the husband I once loved, and I was no longer the wife he once cherished. I don't know what to do now, I sighed, sitting down. I can't keep living like this, but I don't know if I have the strength to let go. Mark still stood there, his hands hanging by his sides, his face devoid of any decisive expression. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't look at the man I had once trusted completely. All I felt now was emptiness, an endless void that I couldn't fill. I love you, Mark finally spoke, but this time, there was no sincerity like before. His words sounded like a rushed apology, not strong enough to erase everything that had happened. I didn't respond immediately. I felt exhausted, too tired to continue this conversation. Everything now felt like a repetition of meaningless words. I didn't know what I was waiting for from him. I didn't know if I could continue with this life or not. I stood up and walked towards the door. I needed time to think, to figure out what I wanted, but deep inside, I knew my life would never be the same again. Whatever my decision was, I couldn't go back.